Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to GSD with Tanwa Part 2, where we talk about how to do research as a graduate student. For those of you who are new to this program, we have this program every Friday at 1:30 p.m. And this is part 2 of the program. In part 1, we talk about how to improve your English as a graduate student or as an academia whose English might not be your first language. But that was part 1, and now we are moving on to part 2, which is how to do research effectively. And we started this series because we think that most of the graduate students that we have seen in the past need some help in developing research skills. So that's why we are here. So my name is Tanwa Pontip. I'm a lecturer at Faculty of Technology and Environment, Prince of Songkhla University, Phuket campus. So this is part 2, day 3. In part 2, day 1 and day 2, we have talked about the misconceptions in doing research, right? We have talked about why thinking that doing a research to find a new idea is incorrect. We have talked about why thinking of a research project as something that get you a publication is also not correct, because the only goal for you to be doing a research is for you to contribute something valuable to the field of research that you are doing. Right? So then in part 2, day 2, we talked about what does it mean to be valuable. We gave very two specific examples from from two very well-known papers, just to give you an example of what does it mean to be a valuable research project. Right? With all that behind us, now that we all understand what does it mean to have a valuable research project, today we're going to talk about how to actually starting to do your research. Right? Now that we all agree that your research project has to be valuable in some ways, how do you actually start? Right? So that's another hard part. So typically when you get into a graduate program, right, whether you apply in, you get a scholarship or whatever, there are usually just two main ways in which you identify the field of research that you are interested in. The first way, which is the most common, the more common one, I guess, not the most common, the more common one is that you apply to a graduate program in a faculty that you like, right? It could be in chemistry, it could be in computer engineering, it could be in architecture, doesn't matter. But typically, when you apply to a program that you like, you will be either assigned an advisor or pick an advisor yourself, right? So you do have an advisor, and that advisor of yours will basically pick the topic for you, right? This is the more common occurrence, especially in Thai programs or graduate programs in Thailand. So if you do that, then basically the field of research that you will be doing have been selected for you, right? So the advisor would be, say, do plastic synthesis in chemistry, right? And that's basically your field of research. This is not to say that you are fixed to that topic, right? Of course, any good advisor would allow you to change the topic if you come and discuss with the advisor, right? So that's the first way. Your advisor pick it for you, basically. The second way, which is the less common one, but also very, very good, is that you apply to a program in a faculty, maybe you pick an advisor, but then you propose to your advisor that you want to do something in, for example, remote sensing of coral reef in Thailand. Right? Because you're passionate about it, maybe you like the environment, maybe you did it in your undergrad, so now you want to continue the work, right? So that's the less common one, but also the more effective one because you get to play around with the idea that you like, right? For today, though, I'm going to assume that you have scoped down your field of research that you are interested in into one specific area. Just, kind of broad. Like you don't have a research thesis yet. You have a field that you want to play in, right? Whether it's chemistry, physics, computer engineering, whatever, right? So you kind of know what field you want to get into, but you don't know where to start, right? You kind of go, oh, I want to do remote sensing of tsunami damage. Ooh, that sounds like a fun thing to be doing, but you don't know where to start. So that's where we are today, right? You want to do the example that I will be using today is a study of tsunami in Thailand using remote sensing. Okay, so that's the example that we can stick with. So this is probably your very first week in graduate school, basically, right? You come in, you want to do remote sensing of tsunami, but you don't know where to start. You don't know what the problems are. You just think the topic is interesting. So today I'm going to break up the session into 4 specific steps, right? Once you have identified the field of research, how do you find the materials that you want to read, right? So this is basically your literature review, right? And then once you have found the materials that you want and you like, how do you access it, right? And that's number 2. And then number 3, once you have accessed the paper, how do you know that the paper is actually good, right? Because there are plenty of research papers out there with low quality, which means that you can't really use it for your work. It doesn't really work that way. It's so low quality. And then number 4, once you have read the papers, how do you keep your thoughts organized, right? I bet most of you have gone through this process, right? You downloaded a paper, you read it once, and you're like, oh, that's a really cool paper. And then 2 months later, you like, oh, I remember that paper that I have read, but I don't remember what it said. Right? So then you have to go back and reread the paper again. So at the end of this session, we will talk about how to read paper maybe once or twice and make it useful for you in doing your research. All right? So with that being said, let's just get started. So again, the first topic that we're going to talk about is how to access the materials that you want to. Hold on, let me share the screen again. So again, the first topic that we're going to talk about is how to access the materials that you want and how to find it, basically. And usually when I ask this question, I usually come to a shocking realization that students are pretty poorly equipped to do literature review, right? So that's going to be our first and second part of this session. How do you even find research papers? Right? Most of you already know Google Scholar, right? Scholar.google.com, right? If you know that, great. But I'm pretty sure you don't know how to use it well. So today we're going to talk about that as well, how to use Google Scholar in an efficient manner. But even before we get to Google Scholar, let's talk about the regular good old Google. Right? So like I said, let's pretend I am a graduate student, first week in school. I only know I want to do remote sensing in tsunami, but I don't know anything else. I just go, oh, this is a very interesting topic. So of course, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google and then I'm going to go remote sensing tsunami. I can't spell tsunami. Thailand, right? Boom. And then I get this, right? Plenty of search result. And this is all great, right? But if you look at it carefully, you see that you get many types of search result, right? The first one is obviously from a research paper, right? Because you can tell because of the way it's structured, it formats the result. The second one is also research paper because from ResearchGate. But then if you scroll down, you start seeing different things. You start seeing the UN report, right? You start seeing another UN report, another report from an organization or a research paper. And then if you keep going, right? If you keep going, you see a bunch more other research paper, right? Which is all great. But what if you want more than that? For example, let's say you only want to study tsunami in Thailand before 2004, right? So 2004 was when the Indian Ocean tsunami hit Thailand, right? But let's say you want to study the tsunami in Thailand before 2004, right? This is where I'm going to teach you how to use the advanced search of Google, right? So for here, obviously people start talking about tsunami in Thailand a lot after the 2004 events. But you wonder what people were talking about tsunami before 2004, right? Before the first tsunami, before the first major tsunami happened in Thailand. Because maybe you want to study the perspective of people regarding tsunami before 2004, right? So once you have done your Google search, you can go into tools, right? And then these will show you two options up here, right? I want you to look at the anytime option, right? And then you can select custom range, right? And then you can go all the way back. You can say, I want to look at what people say about tsunami up to December of 2004. Oh, that's in US format, right? Up to December of 2004, because that was the month that the tsunami happened. So then you go, okay, tsunami in Thailand before 2004. Right? And then you see that people were talking about tsunami in Thailand as well, but it's not about the 2004 tsunami. Right? So that's one of the first useful tools that you can use when it comes to Google Advanced Search. Another thing that you can do is, let's say you want to use Advanced Search in Google, right? You can come to this setting, and then you can click Advanced. Right? What does this bring you? For example, let's say you want to find tsunami information in Thailand, but you don't want research papers. Right? If you just type in tsunami Thailand, right, and just search for it, you will get a bunch of research paper and a bunch of news article like we have seen. This is not useful for your research sometimes, right? Let's say you want to narrow down your search to only government report, and not just any government, but Thai government report. Right? What you can do is you can use the advanced search, and you can go down to site or domain, and you can say, hey, I want any result from Thai government. And you know that the domain name of Thai government's offices always end in .go.th, right? So notice what I'm doing here. I'm saying tsunami in Thailand, and I only want result from the Thai government, and then I go search, right? And then you see that all the results only come from government offices, right? Government organization everywhere around Thailand, right? So then you could do that as well. Or you could say, hey, I don't want government report. I only want academic report, right? .ac.th, and then you go search. And now you have this, right? So you can see that all the reports here are from basically universities. Or maybe you don't want a result in Thailand. Maybe you want result from somewhere else. Let's say you want a result from the United States, right? You want to know what the US have been talking about tsunami in Thailand. So you can change the region to United States and search for it, right? And then you get, Wikipedia is in the US, I guess. So you get something like this, right? World Vision, blah, blah, blah. So that's a very useful tool to have. Another one that you can do is the 2004 tsunami in Thailand. was focused on because Phuket got affected a lot, right? But let's say you don't want to do research in Phuket, you want to do research somewhere else. You could also say, hey, I want tsunami in Thailand, but I don't want the word Phuket to appear anywhere in the report, right? So you could do that as well. So you notice the search term, it goes tsunami Thailand minus Phuket, right? So then all the terms here are only about tsunamis that did not mention Phuket. And then the last thing that I use a lot is this thing called file type, right? So file type, you can go, if you want to report, maybe you want to report in PDF file, so you can search for PDF. So Tsunami Thailand 5 type PDF. So you can see all the reports. But one thing that I do all the time is that sometimes you want to find a data source, but you can't find it anywhere. You try Google it up, you try calling governmental organizations, but they just don't have the data. So what I usually do all the time is that I would come to Google Advanced Search, type in the topic that I want, Tsunami Thailand, and then here's the key part. I go down to file type, and then I select either Excel or CSV. Oh, they don't have CSV anymore. Anyway, I can select Excel because I know that will give me some kind of data, right? And then you see that I have the Excel file for this research over here, right? I have a publication index about tsunami, blah, blah, blah. So that's another good way to do it as well. Or you could say, for example, Hotel Thailand, right? Hotel Thailand and 5 Thai is XLS. And then you see something like Thai Airways database of something, right? Or the BOI database of something, right? This is a good way to find random sources of data that might be on the internet, but you don't know about it. So yeah, so that's how to use Google. But then that's not your main tool of doing research, right? You use it occasionally. Most of you will be using Google Scholar. So let's say I want to do Tsunami Thailand again. So I could search for it, and I could get something like this. And then you basically look through the paper that you like, right? You look through the paper, maybe read the title, see if it's interesting to you. If it's not, then move on to the next one. Right? But before we do that, right, I want to give you some tools that you can use when it comes to Google Scholar as well. So Google Scholar also have this custom range thing. So you can find a research paper, for example, maybe you really want to know the current research in tsunami. So you really only want to know the latest research result. So you can say, hey, I only want the result from last year, right? Or I only want the result from 2020, or I only want the result from 2017, right? You could do that, and I have done this in my research myself. Let me get to it. So if I just use my own example, let's see. I can find it. Haha. Right, so I have written this article. It's in Thai. It's not a very good article. Don't use it as an example, but I'm using it just to show you if I can download it. Oh, I have to log in. That's stupid. Yeah, I don't want to log in. Oh, here it is. All right. So I have used the Google Scholar result to find these terminology in different years before, right? So it's a definitely useful tool to have because you can filter out your result according to the year of publication. So you can basically focus your research on old result or new result, or comparing old result to the new result, right? So it's a fantastic tool to have. But assuming that you have used Google Scholar, right? So that's basically all the useful way that you can find research. You can use the Scopus database, a Web of Knowledge database, but really, Google is so much better. So just use Google Scholar, right? Bottom line, it's just that. So let's assume that you have used Google or Google Scholar, and you have found a paper that you like, right? You have found a paper that you like. The next question then becomes, how do you access the paper? Right? There are many ways to access the paper, ranging from truly legal to might not be legal, but everyone uses it. So today we're going to step through all the options that you have, right? So the first option is super legal and definitely legal, is to use your university access to the paper to download the paper. So if you go to any paper, for example, this one, right? So this paper, you can see that this paper is open source. This paper is provided by Prince of Songkla University subscription, right? So then you can access this paper with no problem at all. But if you at home, maybe you cannot access it because you are not using the university internet connection, right? If that is the case, then I recommend you the VPN connection of Prince of Songkla University or your university. Just go figure it out. Right. So just type in PSU VPN in Google and it will bring you to this website and you can read through the well-written documentation on how to install the VPN. Right. Once you have installed a VPN, then you can access the paper from off campus. Okay. So that's the first way to access any paper. But then you run into some paper. Let me find an example. You will run into some paper that you cannot download. Maybe this one. Oh, you can download it. Never mind. Aha. This one, for example, right? So this one, you cannot access it through PSU because PSU doesn't have subscription, as you can see. Okay. PSU doesn't have subscription to this paper. So if you find this paper and you're like, oh my God, it's such an important paper for me to understand the topic. And if the university does not have access to it, then it just kind of sucks because you really want to read it, but you cannot access it. Right? So the second option for you to use, and it is also legal, is to use this thing called Unpaywall, right? Unpaywall. And this is a non-profit organization that provide open access to many research articles, right? And the way you use it, it's just a Google Chrome extension, right? So you go get the extension and then you just add it to your Google Chrome web browser. Once you have done that, then anytime you go to a research paper website, you have this little icon on the right, right? Suggesting that you can access this paper for free using the Unpaywall extension, right? So if you click on that green lock button, then you get a paper that you can read for free, right? And again, this is truly legal because research papers come in many versions, and Unpaywall just go around and find a research paper version that is free for you to read, right? So you can access it. Now, that's all good, right? So again, the first option is to access this using PSU VPN, PSU internet connection. The second option is to use the Unpaywall, which is also legal. The third option, which is kind of in the gray area, is what I use when I don't know what to do because I really want the paper, but I cannot access it. Right? So for example, this paper, right? I cannot access it using PSU connection. I cannot access it using Unpaywall because you see it's a gray button here. So if I click on it, Unpaywall will say, oh, sorry, we couldn't find anything that you like. So it sucks, right? So this is where the third option comes in. And the third option is maybe legal, maybe not legal, but everyone uses it. So I'm just going to tell you about it because if you don't know about it, then you will be at a disadvantage as a researcher. And it's called, you probably know, sci-hub.se. So the website keeps changing the domain, but it's like sci-hub.se. Right? I would just put that on a banner, and if I get yelled at, then whatever. They want me to teach this class, I'm going to give you all the tools. Right? So it's this website, sci-hub.se. Right? And what you do is that this website is so amazing that it will find you all the papers that you ever need in your life. Right? The only thing that you need to find a paper is what we call the DOI. Right? And this number will come up pretty often. So the DOI is this set of number back here. Sorry, let's do this. Right. So every paper will have this DOI number. Right? DOI stands for Digital Object Identification. So it's like an ID card of a digital file that allows you to search for any digital paper online. So the only thing that you need to do to get this paper from Sci-Hub is to copy the DOI and just put it inside Hub website. And Sci-Hub will just go out and look for the paper for you. Right? So boom, now you have the paper. See? Now you have the paper. Even though the university network cannot access it for you. Unpaywall cannot access it for you, but Sci-Hub can access it for you. Right? But again, Sci-Hub should be your last option because the legal status of it is in question in different countries in the world. So use it at your own discretion. Okay. So that's the second topic for today. You have a topic of interest. You know how to access your materials using Google and Google Scholar. You know how to find your materials using Google and Google Scholar. You know how to access the materials using your university connection, using the Unpaywall extension, and using Sci-Hub, right? And Sci-Hub should be able to get you 99% of the papers that you ever need in your life. So at this point, there should be no excuses of not being able to find a paper that you like. Okay? Cool. So the third thing for today's session is, okay, let's say you have found a paper, right? You have found a paper and you think it's a good paper to read and you have access to it using one of the three options that I just said. The next question then becomes, how do you know that the paper is good? Right? How do you know that the paper is good? How do you know that what you're reading is actually a good quality research paper? And this is one of the hardest things that a new researcher has to learn, because to be able to judge whether a research is impactful or not is really difficult. Right? But there are a few quick ways of judging it. And Google Scholar has already provided you some of the ways to do that. So the first way, as you know, is the word cited by. Right? So the more times a paper is cited, the more impactful or the more useful it probably is. I'm putting probably in there because sometimes a paper gets cited a lot, even though it's not useful at all. But usually it's a pretty good indicator of whether a paper is useful or not. Right? For example, this paper is cited 1 time compared to this paper that is cited 8 times. So you can judge the importance of some papers that way. But do not use that as your only factor. Right? There are many factors that maybe a good paper is never cited, or a really bad paper gets cited many times. Right? So don't get bogged down by that. It's just one of the factors that you can use. Another one is to look at the ranking of the journal that it is published in. Right? To find a journal ranking, you can use a lot of tools, but we will not talk about that here just yet. We will talk about that when we talk about submission of your research paper. Right? So that's down the line. Another thing that you can do is you can look at the authors of the paper. Right? For example, this first paper, you can click on some of the authors, and then you get these crazy looking stats. Right? You get these very crazy looking stats. And why is this important? Because a good author usually produce good quality research paper. So one of the ways to judge whether an author is good or not is to look at the H index, right? The higher this number, the better it is. So typically you will see like 4 or 5, but if you see like 10 or 15, those are really like good researchers. Right? Yeah, but again, that's not the only factors, right? It's just one of the factors. A lot of things go into determining whether a paper is a good quality paper or not. But the ultimate test, again, is to figure out whether that paper is useful for you or not, right? Whether that paper is valuable for you or not. And the only way to do that is to read the paper, okay? The only way to know whether the research paper is good or not is to actually read the paper. Which brings me to the last topic of this session, which is where most of the people have trouble with, right? So I'm going to use this paper as an example, right? An effect of tsunami to hotel occupancy, a case of Phuket, Thailand. And why is this important? Because a tsunami is a natural disaster, just like COVID, right? COVID is a natural disaster. So maybe you are doing a research on the impact of COVID-19 on hotel occupancy in Phuket, right? So you might want to see how long did it take for the hotel industry in Phuket to recover after tsunami, right? And maybe you can project that timeline forward, and you can forecast how long it would take after COVID has ended for the hotel industry to recover as well, right? So very, very fun research, mini research project that you can do. But like I said, one of the problems that students typically run into is that sometimes they find themselves reading a paper many, many times, right? They find a paper that they like, and then they just kind of go, I read it and I think it's useful, so I put it somewhere. And then 5 months later, when you want to refer to the paper, you don't remember what the paper was, you don't remember what they say, and you don't remember why you thought it was useful, right? So today I'm going to give you some tools that I personally use to organize your thoughts and also to organize your references in order for you to use those tools and papers in the future, right? So most of the time, I don't read a paper for my research project more than maybe twice or 3 times at most, except for really exceptional paper, right? Most of the time, if you don't understand what the paper say in 3 readings, then it's either too difficult for you or it's not fit within your research project, or it's a really good paper, right? So it's really difficult to justify. But yeah, you need to organize your thoughts every time you read a paper. So for example, I have never read this paper before, to be honest. So we're gonna go through it together on if I have found a paper, how do I know whether it's useful or not, right? So again, the key thing is that every research project needs to be valuable, right? So if I'm reading through this paper, I need to find why it is valuable to the audience that the paper is targeting, right? So the first thing I'm going to do when I read a paper is, of course, I'm going to read the title, right? So an effect of tsunami to hotel occupancy, a case of Phuket, Thailand, right? So the title itself is saying a lot of things, right? First of all, the scope of the study is only in Phuket, right? And also scoping down to only hotel industry, right? And then scoping down even further, they're not studying the hotel service quality, they're not studying the revenue of the hotel, they're only studying the hotel occupancy, right? How many guests are there? Because a hotel can have 100% occupancy and yet still don't make money, right? So the profitability and occupancy are 2 different factors. So even just the title alone is telling you that this one is only studying the occupancy, not the profitability of the hotel, right? And then lastly, of course, it study the effect of tsunami, right? And this is important because this tells me that they study the effect of tsunami. So what happened after the tsunami, not the anticipation of tsunami, not the fear of the next tsunami, but what happened after a tsunami has happened, right? So that's just from the title alone. That's what I would do in a much quicker manner than what I've just done. And then the next thing I'm going to do is this, right? Most of you probably will read through the abstract, right? And then start going into, can I download this paper? Yes, I can. Let's do that, right? Most of you will start off at the title because, of course, you have to read the title. and then you will go straight into the abstract, right? And then you will read through it, and this is what's gonna happen. You're not gonna understand what the fuck they're talking about. You're gonna be like, how did they do that? I have no idea what is saying, right? What is being said. And then what you're gonna do, which is the biggest mistake you will ever do as a graduate student, is that you're gonna read the abstract, not understanding what it says, and then go straight into the first page of the paper, right? And then you start reading the introduction, right? And then you read it paragraph by paragraph, page by page, and then you go all the way down to conclusion, and then you're like, okay, I still don't understand what it says. How many of you have done that? I bet more than one, right? Most of us have done that. Okay? So let me tell you a better way to judge whether a paper will be useful for you. So again, I will pretend to be a person who is interested in hotel occupancy after COVID has ended, right? So again, COVID is a natural disaster, tsunami is a natural disaster. Maybe they are parallel in some way, right? So that would be my goal in reading this paper. So let's go through it together. So I would look into the abstract and read through it, skim reading it very quickly, right? So the first sentence is just bullshit. It's just like, hotel is important. Done. Don't pay attention to it. Tsunami happened. You have revenue drops in the hotel and restaurant sector. And then, a lot of business owners go into bankruptcy. And then this paper is an initiative study of our research project, evaluate the effect of tsunami on hotel occupancy. So notice that from here to here, that is basically useless information. I'm sorry, authors, but that is useless information to you as a researcher, because you are in this field, you want to study hotel occupancy. So of course, you know about the hotel industry of Phuket, right? You know that hotel industry in Phuket is very important. You know that after tsunami, a lot of hotels went into bankruptcy. Right? So all of this is just filler. It has no uses for you, right? And this one, like this sentence, right? This paper is an initiative study. That is just restating the title, right? The first bit of information that is useful for you is this one, right? This paper has a focus on the speed for the physical reconstruction and tourism market recovery. Right? And once you have read this sentence, and again, usually I do this much quicker because I skim through it, right? But this would be the first sentence that catches my eye, because again, I want to know how fast will the tourism industry, especially the hotel industry, recover after COVID. Right? So then this paper has two focuses, according to the author: the speed for the physical reconstruction. Do we need to care about that? Not at all, right? Because COVID-19 does not physically destroy anything. It does, however, hurt the tourism market, right? And just that alone means that I can probably ignore most of the paper that talk about the speed for the physical reconstruction and go straight to the tourism market recovery, right? Just to see how they measure it. Okay. So then this part talk about physical reconstruction and hotel occupancy. So we don't really care about that. So through the calculation, right, 55% of the time physical. So all of this is physical reconstruction, which we don't really care, right? The quotient of these two values indicate that the reconstruction period is around 9.2 months. Again, we don't care about this at all, right? Blah blah. So this is the first bit of information that is useful for us, right? There is an about 11 months delay between the hotel and resort have finished the reconstruction and the tourists start to visit Phuket, right? So that means that once the physical reconstruction is done after the natural disaster, it takes about 11 months for the tourists to come in. And that should ring your bell if you want to study about hotel recovery post-COVID. Why? Because this number, 11 months, first of all, is a good benchmark, right? After a natural disaster, maybe it will take 11 months. Maybe it will be more, maybe it will be less. But what is more interesting and valuable to you is that how did they measure it, right? How did they measure that it will take about 11 months for the hotel occupancy to recover? And that's the bit that will be very useful for your research, because you could use the same methodology to measure the hotel recovery post COVID-19. Boom, right? So even just the abstract alone, you already know why this paper will be valuable to you. Right? All right. And then after that, it's just this filler of like, therefore, the local government, local tourists, blah, 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 should work together to recover tourism, right? All bullshit. The second recommendation I can give you after the abstract skimming through is that the introduction part, most of the time, you can just go ahead and skip it, right? Again, I have not read this paper, not even once, but I can tell you what it's going to say in the introduction part, right? It's going to say, one, why the hotel business is very important for Phuket. Tsunami that happened causes a lot of damage. It took a long time for the hotel industry to recover, and then this study provided a way to measure how long it took for the recovery to happen, right? So let's go to see it, right? So it said, introduction, nowadays tourism contribute a lot to the industry. Boom, hotel industry is important. See, tsunami happened and it caused a lot of damage, and then Phuket International Airport visitor dropped by 50%, right? Just like I said. And then lastly, many tourism facility in Phuket suffer bankruptcy, and then blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So, and then this would, moreover, this paper provide a good anticipation of the average speed for the physical reconstruction and tourism market recovery. Right. So just like I said, so most research papers, the introduction part is just kind of shit, and you can just totally skip it, right? Or skim through it. I would say read a sentence here and there, but just skip it entirely. And then after that, like the background, you can also just kind of skip it because you kind of know what it is already. Like tsunami happened and it caused a lot of damage. The next thing I'm gonna do after the abstract and the skipping of the introduction is to zoom in on the part that you know will be useful for you. So again, the part that will be useful for us is this part, right? How do they measure the 11 months delay between the full physical reconstruction and the tourists start to come back to Phuket? All right. So if I just keep scrolling through it, they said the impact is this damage. So you can just skip that. This is the repair course. You can also just skip that. It doesn't matter. Again, I have never read this paper before, so I'm just doing it in real time with you right here. So it starts here. Table 4 shows the average occupation rate before and after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami of the 6 samples. So you know that, first of all, this is how they take sample of occupancy rate, right? They just pick sections of customers to do something on. Maybe they do survey, maybe they get the result from the hotel. And then they said, as most hotels did not provide us the monthly occupation rate, so the yearly occupation rate has been shown in table 4. So this talk about reconstruction still, and then you have this, right? Okay, so availability of room when it comes to service. So they have 4 sectors here, from what I can say, and then you can see that once the tsunami happened, the occupancy rate drops a lot, right? And then it starts to recover over here. And if you notice, it takes about 11 months. Okay? So basically, when they approximate that it will take 11 months, what they just do is they just measure occupancy rate and just plot it out. And it just say, hey, this takes about 11 months. So that's how they do it. So for your study, when it comes to COVID hotel recovery, you could propose the same thing, right? You could have a similar graph to this one and estimate the recovery rate of COVID that way, right? Which will be always interesting because COVID has subsided a little bit last year. So you could have plot the occupancy rate after the first lockdown and then use that to estimate the recovery after the second lockdown. That's a very good question, Kiki. Normally, how long should you spend time reading a paper? As long as you need, which is a pretty shitty response. I understand that. But it depends on how useful you think the paper will be. Right? Normally, for a paper that will be your key paper, so usually your research will center around another like key paper that you refer to a lot. That paper you will be reading over it multiple times, like multiple times, right? And you will basically live with that paper. You will live and breathe with that paper. So it will take about a month to read it over and over again. But for paper like this, if I'm just going through the paper to see whether it's useful or not, it usually only takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to go through it. Again, the point is not for you to understand everything about the paper, right? We will talk about how to read a paper effectively next week in more details, like the levels of reading the paper that you should need. But again, like 10 to 15 minutes is probably a good amount of time for you to be spending on the first read. So when you get a paper, you don't know whether it will be useful or not. Don't spend more than 10 to 15 minutes, right? And if you have spent 10 to 15 minutes and the paper is useful for you, you will know, right? Listen to your, I guess, this sounds kind of superstitious, but listen to your heart. Listen to your brain, listen to your instinct. You kind of know whether the paper will be useful or not useful at all, right? So for this paper, just to have a concrete example, if I am trying to study the post-COVID hotel recovery, this paper is only useful for me only for this plot right here, right? Why? Because this gives me a methodology to measure the recovery, can't even speak, the recovery rate of the hotel industry after a natural disaster, right? It gave me a good example on how to do it, how to present the data, and how to measure the data. Right? So it's a fantastic way of fantastic way to use this paper as a reference for your research project. Okay, so notice that took me, even with all the speaking, about like 20 minutes to go through this, and then throw out about 80% of it that is not useful for me at all, right? And just retain this one figure that is useful for me. So this is also a good example of a research paper that is valuable to you because you can pull something out of it, right? Most of the paper that you read will not be useful, right? 70-80% of the papers that you read will not be useful. So that's why I don't recommend you spending more than 15 minutes on the first read, right? Just go through it as quickly as you can and pull out the important part. Right? So then that brings us to the last step of today's session, which is once you have read this paper and you know what it will be, how it will be useful for you, you want to write it down, right? You want to take a note. And at this step, you can take a note in any application you want, but the application that I use is Zotero, right? And you might be using Mandala. Like Mandala works as well. If you don't know what Zotero or Mandala is, let me blow your mind. Let me blow your mind. Hold on, or destroy my screen. Okay, so Zotero is a reference management software. Right? So this is for managing your references for your research project, and it is wonderful because once you have installed the software, right? Zotero.org. Let me type it out. So we might end a little late today because I was passionate about that paper, I guess. All right, so it's here, and this software is free, which is crazy because it's really good, right? So you can download the software, and then you get something that looks like this. And then the next thing I'm gonna recommend you doing is to get the extension. So you can search for Zotero Chrome extension, and you get this Zotero connector. And once you have installed it, you get this little icon up here, right? That looks like a document. So this is useful because anytime you find a paper that you like, you can just click on that icon and it will just save to Zotero. Right? What does Zotero give you? It gives you this citation management system. So it automatically pulls all the others information, the abstract, the title, and all the citation information from the website, which is fantastic, right? And you will see why it is so useful when we talk about writing that paper that you have to write or writing your thesis, because now citation management is semi-automatic. Right? You will not have to reformat it ever again. You will not have to track the numbers on your own ever again, right? So it's fantastic. But the thing that I use a lot is this thing right here, notes, right? Once you have pulled in a paper, you can go to the note section and then you can add a note to this paper. And then in the note, you can say anything you want. You can say, hey, this paper will be useful for me. Let me zoom in a little bit so you see. Can I zoom in? I have never zoomed in Zotero before. I just make it big. There you go. This paper will be useful for me as an example of how to measure the recovery period of hotel occupancy. By measuring the occupancy rate pre and post disaster and demanding that post disaster occupancy equal to the pre-disaster level, the amount of time taken can be estimated as the recovery period. Okay? So I basically jot down or write down the bit of this paper that is important to me. And from now on, I never have to read this paper again because I have read it once. I know how to do it. I have written down the notes, right? And in the future, if I ever forget about, hey, how to estimate occupancy, how to estimate the recovery period, I can just type in recovery period, right? And then this note will come up immediately. Right? So you would never have to read this paper again unless you want to. Right? So that's why I say, like, for most papers that you will use, you will not have to read it more than maybe 2 or 3 times, except for a few papers in your research project. Right? Again, we will touch on how to read paper more efficiently next week, right? Like Kiki said, like, I totally understand this question, right? Because you saw me just blast it through a paper in about 15 minutes. And you're like, oh my God, I wish I could do that. Right? It takes a lot of practice to be able to digest a paper at this speed, right? And you kind of need to know how to do it. And this skill comes with a lot of practice, right? So next week, we're going to talk about different levels of reading, starting from the level that we just did, right? So skim reading it. And then we go into the more detailed reading it. And then we go into the last level, which is called syntopical reading, right? And if you can go through all the steps, all the levels of reading, then you will be a much better reader of research papers. Right? Okay, so Zotero, let's come back to Zotero. So this is where I store all of my citation and references for all of my research. For example, I did post-disaster economic impact on tourism right here. Right? You probably can't see it because the font size is pretty small, but you can see all the citation that I have here. Right? Or I did a lot in solar funding, right? So I talk a lot about, I did a paper on solar energy. So I have like citation in here with all the paper and all that stuff. So it's a super good way to organize your thoughts so that you have all your thoughts about papers in the same place. So you can refer back to it anytime that you want. Okay. So in summary, if anyone has questions, this probably is a good time to ask it. But in summary, today we have talked about a few things. Today we have talked about, if you know your field of research, how do you find research materials, right? Once you have found one, how do you access it? And then lastly, if you have, and then once you have accessed it, how do you know that it's a good quality research paper? Right? And a good quality research paper has a lot of citations. Maybe the author is a really good researcher, but then the ultimate test is to read it, right? So once you have read the paper, there are many different levels of reading, which you will find out next week. You need to organize your thoughts into Zotero or Mandala or Microsoft Word, whatever software you use, right? So that you don't have to reread the papers that you don't want to. So that's basically how to start doing research. And the key is this one though. Despite of everything that I have said, the most important things about starting your research is to read a lot of papers, to read a lot of reports, to read everything that you can about the topic that is interesting to you. Right? And I can't stress this enough. Right? The major mistake that I have seen in graduate students is that they try to read one paper for a week. And if you do that, it will be really hard for you to graduate on time because you will have to read hundreds of papers by the time you can get to write your own paper. Right? 100 of papers read probably will give you one research paper of your own. Right? And if you can only read one paper a week, that will take you 100 weeks for you to finish your research project. And 100 weeks just for reading, that is 2 years. Right? So you spend 2 years reading research paper, which is not a good use of time. Right? So you need to be able to learn to read a lot at different speed. Right? There is no good amount of time to read a paper. You have to adapt your reading speed to the importance of that paper. So then again, we will talk about how to read effectively during next week in GSD. As for today, that was it for today, how to start your research. So again, what I'm going to leave you with is read and read and read a lot. Right? Never stop being hungry for that knowledge because you are interested in this topic after all. So again, this is GSD part 2. We meet every day at Friday at 1:30 p.m. If you would like to follow this series, there's a link to the video playlist down here in the video description. If you would like to talk to me, there's also a link to Line Open Chat. So make sure you join there just so you don't miss the news. With all of that, this is part 2, day 3, how to start doing your research. And this is GSD part 2 with Tanwa. I'll see you again next Friday at 1:30 p.m. All right. As for today, have a good afternoon.